Hello and welcome into another episode of Lockdown Wolves. Today on the show, the Timberwolves made two free agent signings. One really important, a Kyle Anderson replacement for the rotation. We'll talk about that today. We'll also set up the roster sitting here right now. What do the Wolves still have to do this offseason? It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Lockdown Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Lockdown Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Lockdown Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKDOWNNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Happy Thursday, everybody. Happy Independence Day, 4th of July if you're in the U.S., and hopefully you get the chance to take some time off work and, I don't know, I guess enjoy NBA free agency and maybe some baseball or whatever it is that you do, fireworks, whatever you do on the 4th. Enjoy it. We'll, of course, still have a show, obviously, today. And then also tomorrow, we're still daily throughout the month of July. Lots to cover. And related to free agency, the Wolves made what is likely to be their most consequential free agent move of the offseason on Wednesday. So we're going to talk about that here today. We'll reset the roster and where we sit right now, what the Wolves might still do this offseason, what they might not do as well. So we'll get to all that here today. A big thank you off the top for making Lockdown Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Lockdown Wolves. You can also watch on the Lockdown Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Lockdown T Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right. So the Timberwolves, we actually just yesterday on Wednesday on the Minnesota basketball party, we went through a list of guys who the Wolves could look at signing. I had talked on Tuesday about, it was either Monday, I think it was Tuesday, about my list of guys I wanted the Wolves to go after for the minimum. And a couple guys I thought would probably get more, a couple guys that were end of the roster type guys. And a name that I failed to mention on Tuesday that came up in the basketball party, and I agreed with this when it came up, was Joe Ingles. And I mentioned him in passing, I think it was probably late last week, but I had convinced myself, like, hey, just last year he made $11 million with the Magic on a one-year deal. And the Wolves, Dane Moore reported on Twitter that he thought the Wolves were offering Ingles around $7 million last year, and he took 11 to go to the Magic. And he had a good year. He's a year older. But I was still surprised they got him for the vet minimum. And that's who the Timberwolves signed on Wednesday. That is going to be, as I said, in the open, the most consequential signing the Wolves make this year, which of course they're not, it's not like they have cap space or anything, but it's a really important addition. And I'll get into a little bit what he brings to the table, but just why I neglected to mention him Tuesday. I didn't think there's any chance they get him for the vet minimum. I was throwing around Jay Crowder and Reggie Bullock and Prince, who I believe Torian Prince got the minimum from the Bucks as well. He signed a little bit before Ingles. Names like that. I just didn't think they'd get Ingles for that price, and I'm pleasantly surprised. He certainly would be in that first tier of guys that I thought the Wolves should go after. I thought he'd be like, well, anyway. So Joe Ingles is, if you're not familiar with his game, I mean, he's going to be 37 this year. He turns 37 before, like, basically early October, right before the season starts. He's big. He's essentially a combo forward that's going to play probably most of his minutes with the Wolves at the 3, just because of how many true bigs the Wolves have. But he played small ball 4, not really small ball 4. He played the 4 for the Jazz, a fair amount back during his career in Utah. He spent 8 seasons with the Jazz. So he played with Rudy Gobert for a long period of time. He played with Mike Conley for several years. And then he spent 1 year in Milwaukee in 22-23. And that was he tore his ACL toward the end of his season his last season in Utah, 21-22. So he signed with Milwaukee and didn't play the first portion of the year because of the recovery. Came back, played 46 games, and still shot 41% from 3. And then that was the Milwaukee team that won, I think, 56 games, was the number 1 seed in the East, and then lost to the Heat in 5 games, of course, battling injuries and all that stuff, but still a 1 seed losing to an 8 seed. Then last year he signs with Orlando, and Orlando has, I think pretty much the season people expected, which was a pretty decent one, maybe a little better than people thought. They won 47 games, lost in 7 to Cleveland in the first round. So Joe Ingles has been in the playoffs most years of his career, outside of a couple of poor Utah years early on. I mean, yeah, he's been in the playoffs basically every season except for his first 2. And he's one of those guys that's just a winning role player. He's a career 41% three-point shooter. He's only shot below 39% from 3 one time, dating all the way back to his rookie season. And that was his the year in which he tore his ACL during the season. So he's actually having a poor shooting year before he got hurt. But then the last 2 years, he's bounced back, shot 41% with Milwaukee, 43.5% last year with Orlando, which is right up there with some of the best seasons of his career. So again, 41% from 3 for his career. He doesn't give you a whole lot else scoring wise, and that's okay. He doesn't give you a whole lot else on the glass, and that's okay because of some of the other stuff that he provides. He fills the Kyle Anderson role offensively, and that he's going to be asked to facilitate a little bit from the forward spot. He had a 23% assist rate last year, which was his highest in 3 years. He's got a career assist rate of over 21%, which is really high for a guy who technically is an off-ball. Like, his offensive game is as a catch-and-shoot three-point shooter. Last year, 71% of his field goal attempts were threes. The year before, 82%. For his career, more than 2/3, or actually pretty much exactly 2/3 of his shot attempts have been three-pointers. But yet he handles the ball quite a bit in the half court, in the open floor, in the pick and roll, and can find teammates really well. He's such a good passer. Like, guys know he's not trying to drive to look for his shot. He's driving to open up shots for others. And yet it's still effective because he's that good of a passer and he's that good of a catch and shoot three-point shooter as well. So I think we'll dig a little bit more into this. I want to dig into, like, we'll do a couple of, we got some time here because I don't think the Wolves are going to do a whole lot else move-wise until we get to Summer League. So I may do this tomorrow, but dig a bit more into the overall, like, last offseason I did, like, I did a couple shows all about, like, hey, here's who's gone. Jalen Noel's gone. Whoever else they moved off of last year, or at least removing McLaughlin from the regular rotation, some of that stuff, replacing them with guys like Troy Brown, Shake Milton, Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Here's what the Wolves are trying to do in terms of, like, improving point of attack defense, screen navigation, ball screen navigation, catch and shoot, three-point shooting. So we'll do one of those looks as well, and basically just kind of say, hey, look, Joe Ingles catch and shoot is replacing Kyle Anderson. Like, Kyle Anderson didn't make threes last year. This is huge. Now, there's shortcomings too, and we'll get a little bit into that. Like, what did Kyle Anderson bring that Joe Ingles can't bring? So much of that is on the defensive end. Most of it is. But that feels like the sort of downturn, or I guess regression, in terms of what the role is that the number one defense in the league by far last year can handle. I think they could absorb going from slow-mo to a equally, actually, apparently, according to Basketball Reference, one of Joe Ingles' nicknames is Slow-Mo Joe. So there you go, from slow-mo to Slow-Mo Joe. Ingles isn't as good of a defender, but he's okay. He's passable on defense, and that's going to be important. I want to talk a little bit more about that. I want to get into a couple more of the rate-based stats, and then also my guy Jack Borman, who's on the basketball party with us on Wednesdays, tweeted out some numbers from Synergy that I'll just share those from Jack's tweet, because I think it again paints the picture of exactly why Tim Conley and the Wolves front office targeted Joe Ingles as soon as they knew they couldn't get Kyle Anderson. Hey, we'll take a small hit defensively to improve our offensive, to have hopefully equal offensive ball movement as last year's team, but also improve the 3-point shooting. Because, like, well, we'll get into this more, but I mean, I was talking about how the Wolves had 2 non-shooters in the rotation last year, and it was best if they didn't share the floor, Rudy and Kyle Anderson. As of right now, they don't have any non-shooters in this rotation. We'll see what the rookies do, but those guys are supposed to be able to knock down threes. Like, this is a team where everybody but Rudy's going to knock down threes. So that's going to be huge as well for the Wolves offense. So we'll get into all that, including those synergy numbers, talk about Joe Ingles' overall fit with the Wolves. We'll do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. They have priority last minute deals as well, which is awesome. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for anything. It's not just sports. It's not just baseball. And I'm actually going to be taking a trip at some point here soon to the East Coast. We're going to be in New York, going to look for, sporting events, sure. But obviously tickets, Broadway, right? Theater, comedy shows as well. Concerts, all of the above when you're traveling and when you're in a new town, wherever you are, wherever you live. If it's in Minnesota, obviously, same thing there. Grab tickets to Twins Tigers, I guess, today, or whoever's in town this weekend for the 4th of July weekend as well. You can do all that over with our friends at Game Time. They have flash deals. Even more can be saved with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. They also have a lowest price guarantee. If you find a better price somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying your MLB tickets or tickets for anything else with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long? If so, no doubt you have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting. Instead, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right. So, Joe Ingles. Well, let's talk a little bit about the synergy numbers that our guy Jack Borman put out on Twitter here on, I guess, shortly after the signing. And I like, basically, it tells a similar story, but with a bit more detail as the rate-based stats that I was just mentioning, related to his assist rate, related to his 3-point rate and 3-point percentage. So last season only with Orlando per synergy, and again, this is per Jack Borman on Twitter, JR Borman 13. Go follow him. He was the editor-in-chief of Gatus Hoopus for a long time, was on our postcast for about half the season last year, did most of the away games, and is on our Wednesday basketball party, which, by the way, brief plug, if you missed it or if you weren't aware of it, it's actually the last show in the feed. Before this one, if you're listening to audio, the last show before this is the Minnesota basketball party. We did some free agency reaction and prediction. This, of course, was before the Ingles signing, but Ingles comes up in the show. Jack Borman, Reggie Wilson from Care 11, Ron Johnson for the Ron Johnson Show, myself, and Sam Ekstrom of Locked On Sports Minnesota. So go check it out, the episode before this one in your audio feed. So Jack Borman tweets out, Joe Ingles last season for Orlando per synergy, he averaged 1.52 points per catch and shoot attempt. That's 99th percentile. That's insane. And again, it goes back to, he pretty much only shot like what did I say? 70% of his 3-point or of his shot attempts were threes. Yeah, 71% of his shot attempts last year were threes. And the dude shot 43.5% for three. So that's no surprise, but it just tells you how efficient and effective he was. Unguarded catch and shoot, 1.78 points per unguarded catch and shoot, 99th percentile. That means he made basically, like, this is oversimplified it, but that means he basically made 2/3 of his wide open catch and shoot shots. You know how many wide open shots he's going to get playing with Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert on a short roll in the middle of the floor? And that, how many times was he getting that shot in that Utah offense with Conley and Rudy Gobert running pick and roll, or Donovan Mitchell running pick and roll in what would now be the ant roll in the middle of the floor, and Jingles just stands in the corner and gets his wide open 3-point shot. And again, we'll dig a bit more into the actual, I mentioned the catch and shoot, some of the different B-ball index numbers as well. I think we'll do this on Friday's show. But just incredible. It's the absolute perfect fit. A guy who's not going to miss those wide open catch and shoot shots. We mentioned already 43% basically on 3-point attempts last year. He generated 1.01 points per possession on pick and rolls with passes. So back to what I said when I first started talking about Ingles last segment. He's a really good passer out of the pick and roll. 67th percentile. He's not a point guard. He's not somebody who's going to attack you off the dribble and score in the paint. That's not his game, yet he's still effective in pick and roll game because he's so crafty. He knows exactly, how to snake through the defense, and his passes are so good. He has got such good touch on his passing. We talked about the assist rate already, and we can talk about where that stacks up with last year's Wolves team. But an assist rate last year of 23%. Actually, let's talk about that. I'm just going to pull it up right now. I didn't actually prepare this, but that's going to be really high. That's going to rank really high in the Timberwolves team last year. So I'm just going to pull it up right now. Overall assist rate last year, this would plug him in. What did I say it was? 24%? 23% assist rate. Would have slotted him in behind only Mike Conley, Kyle Anderson, who's 25%, Anthony Edwards, and right behind Jordan McLaughlin at 23.7%. So right there with the 2 point guards, Ant, who's creating a ton, and Kyle Anderson, who's replacing. And he's got, again, the Joe Ingles career assist rate is over 21%. He's got a couple of years over there, over 24%. So it's right in line there with the guys ahead of Monte Morris, ahead of, obviously Cat, Alexander Walker, who initiated some offense, Shake Milton, all those guys. It's going to be right there. Like that's the type of player. I'm not saying he's like going to be their point guard. I want to be clear about that. What I'm saying is he will give you that same level of offensive distribution production as Kyle Anderson did last year. That's the whole idea, is he's replacing that role, but also giving you shooting. And where you're taking the hit, it's not on offense. You're taking the hit on defense. And the last thing is assist to turnover that Jack has, 215 assists to 67 turnovers. That's a 3.2 assist to turnover ratio. And again, going back to the rate-based stats on Basketball Reference, 23% assist rate. Turnover rate was a little high for him last year. It was just over 22%. But that's actually the worst of his career. The year prior with Milwaukee, just 17%. The year prior with Utah, 13%. He usually was in the 15 to 17% range. For his career, it's just shy of or just over 18%, excuse me. So turnover rate a little high, but I mean, Kyle Anderson last year, actually, I have it right here. What was Kyle Anderson last year? Yeah, not quite that bad, about 16%. It felt the first half of the year, Kyle Anderson turned the ball over way too much. I think that improved as the year went on. So again, and the other thing to point out here, and we're just talking about offense so far, and Ingles, I think, is an upgrade offensively because he provides the same level of essentially the same level of initiating offense, but he's a catch and shoot guy and doesn't need to get to the nail to get a weird push shot off to be effective with the ball in his hands. Teams are going to have to guard Joe Ingles because of the passing angles and passing ability that Ingles creates, not because he's going to beat you off the dribble. And when he doesn't have the ball in his hands, he's going to catch and shoot and make these shots, almost 2 points per possession on unguarded shots from the perimeter for Joe Ingles. He's going to absolutely crush it in this Wolves offense. Joe Ingles is making the minimum, and Kyle Anderson is getting $9 million a year from Golden State. He was making $9 million a year with Minnesota. So this is a pretty high percentage of the same production, if not greater production offensively. You're taking a hit defensively, and that's one of the other things Jack has in his tweet. He talks about how he shoots out of pick and rolls, which I already addressed. Like, he's not going to score out of pick and rolls, but teams still have to respect the passing ability. He's not going to score at the rim. It's not his game. They have him as 30th percentile among forwards in terms of defensive EPM, a negative 0.9. So, but also, like, depending on where you look, like some of the box plus minus numbers related to his defense, which are taken with a grain of salt, they're not all encompassing stats. Those are positive. So I think he can still provide you. He's got size, he's got know-how, he's got experience. He's not going to be guarding on the perimeter using lateral quickness to guard the point of attack. He's not going to be guarding ball handlers. That's not the idea with Joe Ingles. I think he could be a fine team defender. And if that's your only, if that's the only drawback here, then Joe Ingles at the vet minimum lined up with Kyle Anderson at whatever he would have made when you factor in, because remember the penalty for being over the second apron, the $9 million would actually be something like, I think close to $30 million is what the Wolves would actually pay because of the tax bill. There's really no contest here. Like, I would actually take Joe Ingles, period, over Kyle Anderson. Now, that doesn't factor in some of the intangibles, the off-court stuff, his locker room presence, familiarity, all that stuff does matter. But of course, Joe Ingles has familiarity with Mike Conley. He's got familiarity with Rudy Gobert. And I just think the three-point shooting for a team that, yes, was very good and finished last year third in the entire league in three-point percentage. I don't want to lose that over this offseason. This team was third in three-point percentage, but they're only 17th in three-point attempt rate. And they didn't shoot enough threes, especially early on in the season. Too many of their three-point attempts were just Anthony Edwards off the dribble. He led the team in attempts per game from outside the arc. And of course, Cat being hurt for a little while didn't help that. Conley had a career three-point shooting year, but there were they just didn't get enough three-point attempts from those other roles on the roster. You slot Joe Ingles in, Kyle Anderson was shooting 0.6 threes a game at 23%. That jumps to 3 or 4 threes per game at 40%. That's going to have a positive impact on your offense. Okay, I want to talk about the Wolves' other signing. We'll briefly reset the roster, and then I want to spend Friday really digging into kind of the point I made earlier about like, hey, the only guy in the rotation that's not shooting threes effectively now or not a threat is Rudy Gobert. I want to talk more about that, and then kind of that like layout. What's going out in terms of Kyle Anderson, Monte Morris, apparently now Jordan McLaughlin, et cetera, TJ Warren, and what's coming in the form of the rookies, Dillingham, Shannon, and now Joe Ingles, PJ Dozier, and then anyone else the Wolves might potentially sign. So we'll talk about those spots next, and then tomorrow we'll do some of the other kind of overall resetting. So all of that here is upcoming. All right. So the Timberwolves also signed PJ Dozier on Wednesday, and this was a bit of a weird one to me. It's reportedly, and now I'm forgetting where I saw it, and I feel bad for not citing this correctly, but there was a report that it's only a partial guarantee for PJ Dozier, which makes sense, but it's also weird because, if it's a partial guarantee, then I guess there's a chance that they could look at this as a training camp deal. I guess I'm not 100% sure. So when it was initially announced, it was just kind of assumed it was a vet minimum deal, which would mean the Wolves have 14 guys on standard contracts and only one open roster spot in terms of standard contracts. They would have 14 guys booked on contracts, one open spot, and then we'll talk about the two ways here in a second. However, if it's only a partial guarantee, they could basically treat it like a training camp deal, and he gets, whatever now for being on the roster through training camp, and they could sign somebody else to a fully guaranteed deal, and then they would have the option of converting Dozier to a deal to fill out the roster with the 15th spot, or perhaps he ends up in the G League again, which, by the way, he played in the G League for the Wolves, not last year, but the year prior, was overseas last year. So that would be better because, frankly, it would be a lot more exciting, I guess, or like it would seem a lot more functional if they had somebody that they knew what they could provide. The thing with PJ Dozier, and I don't mean to be unfair to PJ. He was kind of a bouncer on the league guy early on. He played a couple games in Oklahoma City as an undrafted rookie. He played 6 games in Boston in 18-19, signed in Denver, ended up as a rotation piece for the team that played well in the bubble, the Jamal Murray breakout. And then the following year was a legit rotation piece for them. Started 6 games, was averaging 22 minutes a game. The idea was he could be kind of a 3-and-D wing, although the three-point shot never really developed. And then he ended up tearing his ACL. I guess it was the following year he tore his ACL when he was still a rotation piece for them, still just shooting 31% from 3. And then the following year, 22-23, he goes to G League for the Wolves as he's working back, ends up playing a bit role for Sacramento. Then last year he played in Serbia. And he didn't really shoot the 3 all that well in Serbia either. I want to say he was around 33%. Let's see if I could pull it up real quick. I think he was around 33. Yeah. He was 30.1% overall, 32.3% on catch and shoot threes last year in Serbia for PJ Dozier. So he's not a 3-point shooter. Career in the NBA, 31% on 270 3-point shots over parts of 6 seasons. He's a good defender. He's not a great defender. Frankly, I don't really know what they're trying to get out of PJ Dozier. Clearly, Tim Conley has an affinity for him, and I don't know what else he brings to the table from an intangible standpoint. He must be great in the locker room. He must, the team must think he's got some upside defensively. He is a big, like he could facilitate a little bit. Like he's pretty good as a facilitator in pick and roll. He's another, the Wolves obviously like big players at every position. He can go out there and play the 2 or the 3 and at 6'6" with a good wingspan and distribute and run the offense a little bit if you need him to. I just don't know in what scenario he's going to be your choice to do that when you've got run through the point guards. You've got Mike Conley. You've got Anthony Edwards. You've got Nickeil Alexander-Walker. You've got Joe Ingles. All these guys are likely going to be the choice to run the offense before you get to PJ Dozier if he makes the team. So this is obviously purely a depth play. There's no world in which he's going to automatically be a rotation guy, and we'll dig more into the rotation. Well, actually, we'll do it here in a minute, but we'll spend more on it Friday. I'm unclear as to what the plan is here. I'm not getting too twisted about it because we're talking about the 10th or 11th or 12th guy on the roster. And if it is a partial guarantee, there could still be another move coming. And either way, even if it's not, and this is a straight vet minimum deal, they've still got an open roster spot. I would still be surprised if that's the case. Say this is a full guarantee, or at least they're treating this as the 14th player on their roster. They could still sign someone else. I wouldn't necessarily expect them to, because they've got they've got Jalen Clark on a two-way. He signed a 2-year two-way deal last year, and they're going to want to convert him before the end of the season so that they have his rights. That he's a restricted free agent next offseason, like what they did with Luka Garza. So he likely gets converted. Jalen Clark does to a standard contract unless, something terrible happens early in the season. But the plan is he plays in the summer league. He's probably a fringe rotation guy for them early next year. That might be strong, but I think they're going to try and find him minutes early in the season. And he probably ends up on a standard contract. So I'd be a little surprised if they signed a 15th player. If they do, that tells me that the Dozier contract is partially guaranteed. So if that gets passed along officially, we'll definitely talk about that on here because I think that's important. There are only 2 point guards on this roster. And so whether it's a two-way deal like a Daisha Nix type guy is an insurance policy for a third point guard. I guess last year they really only had 2 point guards as well because it was only McLaughlin and Conley until they acquired Monte Morris. So they're clearly comfortable with Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Ant being the next guys up in terms of point guard duties. But all that to say, it's a little bit weird that Dozier gets one of those spots. At least that's how it appears. Okay, so resetting the roster right now. The Timberwolves at the guard spot have Mike Conley and Rob Dillingham as really the point guards on this roster. Rookie Rob Dillingham. And then Anthony Edwards and Nickeil Alexander-Walker I'd put in that same category. That's 4 guys there. On the wing, you've got Jaden McDaniels, you've got Joe Ingles, and then your next line is, in some order, Terrence Shannon Jr., the late first-round pick this year, Josh Minott, who we'll talk a lot more about as the offseason goes on, and then Leonard Miller, who technically is a big, but because of the way the Wolves roster lays out, he's probably more of one of those swing forwards, a 3/4, like what Kyle Anderson and Joe Ingles. Kyle Anderson was and Joe Ingles is. I'm going to put Leonard Miller in the wing category. And then last would be PJ Dozier. Is it a partial guarantee? Is it a full guarantee? We don't know. Centers, of course, Rudy, Cat, Nas, and then Luka Garza. I will say I missed this a week ago, and the team hasn't reported it, and I don't know that I've seen Local Beat report this at all. I saw there was an ESPN reporter who reported that Jesse Edwards, who played center at West Virginia last year and spent 4 years before that at Syracuse, that he was signed to a 2-way deal. I'll spend more time on him once that's like confirmed, but it's out there. Like, I don't even think it was reported on like Hoops Rumors. Like, it was very, I saw it somewhere and then I dug into it, and there's only there was an ESPN reporter that it wasn't like one of the main, I think it might've been a college reporter or something that put it out there right after the draft that they signed Jesse Edwards. So more to come on Jesse Edwards, but the short version is he's a center. He's a big dude. He's like 6'11" with a 7'2" wingspan. Really nice defender. Actually looks a little bit like Rudy Gobert. I watched just a little bit on him. Looks a little like Rudy Gobert on the floor. He's maybe a little bit more comfortable around the rim offensively and not obviously to the level of Rudy defensively. But looks like he could be a rim running, lob threat type big with great size and decent athleticism. So more on Jesse Edwards. We'll definitely talk more about him once we're sure whether or not, and I guess if he's playing in summer league, then we'll have a pretty good hint that he is on a 2-way. So we'll talk more about him later. But if that's the case, then you've got Jalen Clark, you've got Jesse Edwards, a guard, a smaller guard, and a center, and they'd still have 1 2-way open. Odds are they leave that open through summer league. They see if anybody wows them on the summer league roster, which they have not announced yet. And then we'll find out who gets that spot. So sitting here right now, 14 of 15 standard roster spots, 2 of 3 2-way deals are apparently filled. We don't know if the Dozier contract is a full guarantee or not. We also don't know for sure about the Jesse Edwards 2-way contract. So we will revisit this next week, or if anything gets reported before Friday's show. And then summer league starts in like a weekish. Summer League training camp, I think, is late next week. So we'll get a full Summer League roster at some point next week, and we'll dig into some of the notable names on that roster. That's always fun to go through recognizable names from the G League, from past NBA seasons, and also from college basketball. So we'll do that next week too. But tomorrow, we'll dig into the roster a little bit more. We'll talk more about which roles are replacing which roles. We'll talk about some of the synergy and B-ball index numbers that prove that the Wolves offseason, I think, has been successful for what was on the table for them to maybe do, why I think the offseason has gone well so far for Minnesota. So we'll do all that on Friday's show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon at Fire TV, and you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your local experts on all the biggest stories. Remember, we'll be back tomorrow. We'll be talking more roster, and then next week, we're still daily throughout the month of July. So tons to come on free agency, summer league, and more. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.